So thank you on behalf of the International Society for Quality of Life Studies for joining this webinar today. We are pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Alberto Prati. Alberto Prati is an assistant professor in economics at the University College of London, where he teaches economic psychology. He also serves as a research fellow at the University of Oxford and is an associate researcher at the London School of Economics. He has a BS in econometrics, BA in philosophy, a master's in economics, and a PhD in economics from Aix-Marseille University. He works on interdisciplinary issues related to well-being measurement, memory, beliefs, and sustainability. Last year, ISQOLS was pleased to award Alberto's PhD dissertation with the Best Dissertation Award, second place. The title was Memory and Subjective Well-being, which he'll be presenting today. Empirical analysis of workers and consumers and endogenous recall behaviors. So hopefully we'll be able to upload that PhD dissertation soon to our website so you can all check it out. In the meantime, Alberto, it's my pleasure to introduce you and take it away.
Thank you, Jill, for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for to ISQOLS for the invitation. Today, I would like to present a few studies, and I know that you will forget most of what I'm telling you, which is absolutely normal, of course. We forget stuff all the time, and it's actually what I study. I study memory, how, when, and why people remember and forget things, and how this can help collecting and understanding data on subjective well-being. So let me start by narrowing down a little bit these two complex words, which are memory and subjective well-being. So by memory, I mean long-term semantic memory. That is to say, I'm going to look at how people remember information, not really episodes, which have been learned some time ago in the horizon of months or years, not really of seconds. And by subjective well-being, I will only focus on self-reported satisfaction rating. So I might use the term happiness, happy people, unhappy people. I will mean satisfied or unsatisfied people, while I'm not going to present today anything about mood or emotions. Now, I don't think I need to spend much time about why we should care about subjective well-being. There is an increasing demand for reliable measures of well-being. It might be less obvious why the relationship with memory, this will become apparent during the presentation, I hope. But I think that the definition by Daniel Kahneman already brings up the importance of this bridge when he says that life satisfaction is an act of memory and construction. And indeed, you can think of asking the question on life satisfaction to a complete amnesic. This question can't really be answered if you don't remember anything about your life. Today's talk will be mostly about the implications for subjective well-being research, so I'm not going to spend much time on the memory mechanisms, but of course, I'm very happy to discuss this in the Q&A if time allows. This is the overview of the studies that I'm presenting today. The first one was now published quite a while ago, and it's about how people recall their income. And the interest for this comes from the fact that the question, does money make people happy, is probably the most studied question in happiness economics. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of studies regressing satisfaction measures on income measures. And we know that there is a positive, robust correlation between earnings and satisfaction, not as large maybe as we might expect, but this is a very robust finding. However, sometimes we might forget that despite income is an observable variable, it is actually not observed in the surveys, but is self-reported. And if for some observable variables such as age, this is not much of a problem. I mean, I'm in my 30s. When I'm asked about my age, I hesitate, but we can believe that respondents are quite accurate about some variables such as age or education. But when it comes to income, people can be quite imprecise about recalling their earnings. Now, there are different reasons for this. One of them is that questions on income are perceived as particularly invasive. Sometimes there is a little bit of confusion between net and gross income, but a very simple explanation is that people don't recall exactly how much they earn. They know more or less the window, but they might round up or round down this number that they have in mind. And this brings to the question, is there a correlation between the recall errors and satisfaction? Now, to answer this question, I met two records, a survey which was run in France on 3,000 employees, and whose sample was drawn from some administrative records. This allowed me to have three pieces of information at the time, which is the wage reported in the questionnaire, the self-reported wage, a reliable measure of wage, which is the one in the administrative records. This wage was reported by the employers, and therefore even question of tax avoidances should be less important. And the third measure, wage satisfaction. People were asked, are you satisfied with your wage? And they responded on a scale from very dissatisfied to very satisfied. Now here is sketch kind of a model of how to think about the memory problem, why there should be any correlation between the recall error and the satisfaction. Think of the following. At some point, there are two periods, and in the first period, the person learns about her income. Now, she might be enthusiastic about it, she might be frustrated and disappointed. In period two, sometime later, the person is interviewed, asked how much she earns. The person recollects this information and then gives an answer. The hypothesis that I tested in this study, which I call hedonic recall bias hypothesis, is that in the process of recalling the information, the satisfaction attached to this information, so wage satisfaction, can impact how people recall their wage. This is a scatter plot of the wage reported in the survey and in the administrative register. You see that the correlation is very high, it's over 95%, but you also see that the dots are not all on the 45-degree lines. So there is some difference between the two. And it turns out that through regression analysis, I'm not going to show you the table today, but it turns out that recall errors actually correlate with current satisfaction. That is to say, unsatisfied workers tend to underestimate the amount of money they earn, and the less satisfied they are, the more they underreport, and vice versa for satisfied people. So to give you an idea of the magnitude of this effect, here there is an example based on the actual estimates. Imagine a person earning 40,000 euros per year and who's very satisfied with a wage. Her probability to underreport the wage in the survey is relatively low, 28%. But if the same person with the same characteristics actually reported to be very dissatisfied with that wage, the probability to underreport would be double. Now, this behavioral pattern that, to the best of my knowledge, had not been documented before, apart from being maybe intriguing psychologically, also has quite strong implications for the analysis of satisfaction data. And to give you the intuition of this, I would like to give an example. So let's assume that Anthony, who's online, and myself earn the same wage. But Anthony is very satisfied with his wage, while I'm not. I'm very dissatisfied. And then there is a researcher who asks us how much we earn. Anthony will tend to overreport his wage, while I will tend to underreport my wage. Therefore, the researcher would wrongly infer that Anthony is more satisfied because he's earning more, and I'm less satisfied because I'm learning less, while this is actually not true. So in technical terms, this is a problem of endogeneity of the measurement error. And it's described a little bit more formally with this bar chart. So the bar charts that you see report the estimated coefficients associated with wage in a standard satisfaction regression, where you satisfy, in this case, wage satisfaction on wage. And what you can see if you focus on the bars on the left-hand side is that if we use survey data, the effect of wage is substantially higher than if we use the data from the administrative register. And the reason for this is exactly the what I described before, the fact that there is an endogenous part in the error when people self-report their wage. By the way, if the error, the misreporting was just random, this gray bar should actually be lower. We would have what is called an attenuation bias. So to give you a sense of how important the bias is, when using wage satisfaction, regression analysis from survey data tend to underestimate by about 20% the role of wage for satisfaction. For some populations, the populations which are particularly enthusiasts about their wage, like the youngsters, this can go up to 50%. So take-home message, it's like we're likely to have an overestimation problem when we're using self-reported income. However, please remember that here I didn't use life satisfaction. So my conjecture is that the overestimation bias for life satisfaction is likely to be lower, rather between 0 and 20%. So let me move from the right-hand side of the life satisfaction regression to the left-hand side, since not only the determinants of well-being are affected by memory, but also well-being measures themselves can depend on memory. So we know from experimental data that there exists a memory experience gap in feelings. But this, you might think of the pick and rule, which was famously studied about pain. But these studies are typically about emotions, mood, pain, and about very short time intervals in the order of minutes or days. But didn't really know how people think about their past life. Can people recall how satisfied they were with their lives? And with Claudia Senik, we set a series of studies to try and answer this question. The first step was to compare the longitudinal reports of life satisfaction, that is to say, using panel data, looking at the life satisfaction given by a person each year, with the backward reconstruction which was given at a point in time. Are the two correspondent or not? So more precisely, we used two questions from the German socioeconomic panel. The first one has now been asked for more than 30 years. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And it's, how satisfied are you with your life, all things considered, on a scale from 0 to 10? But then in 2016, the respondents of the panel were also asked to pick one of the 9 pictures, which you are seeing now on the slides, which best described how their life evolved over the past 10 years. So the first thing that we want to look at is which picture people picked. So do people feel in general that they are now on a point which is higher with respect than 10 years ago, or vice versa? And it actually turns out that yes. So most people, so more than 50% of respondents, describe the evolution over the 10 years as somehow increasing. So in other words, most people feel that they are better off than they used to be in the past. This is not new. It was already documented by some psychologists using different questions. And I can tell you that although I'm showing you only this particular study, but the stylized fact that people feel that they're doing better is a very robust one. But then the next question was, okay, people feel that they're doing better, but is the reconstruction over the backward reconstruction, the memory of these past 10 years, somehow consistent with the life satisfaction that was reported over time? And perhaps surprisingly, yes, the answer is the two are pretty consistent. People can, to some extent, recall their past happiness. So the figure that you're seeing on the left is the average life satisfaction over between 2006 and 2016 of the people who chose picture 3 to describe the evolution of their life. And you can see that it's indeed somehow a somewhat increasing, a bit wonky, but increasing line, and vice versa for people who described their past 10 years as decreasing. Now, here I'm showing only 2 of the 9 pictures, but if I quickly let you eyeball also the other pictures, this is consistent across the different types of reconstruction. Now, these tell us 2 things. The first one is that people can, to some extent, recall their past happiness. But it also tells us something about rescaling. So by rescaling, I mean the fact that people might use different scales over time, when compared over time. And if either people are absolutely unable to recall their past happiness, or rescaling is absolutely bizarre and giant, we would not observe this pattern. So the comforting news is that when we observe an increase in life satisfaction over time, this is unlikely to be due to rescaling only. However, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that people recall their past perfectly. I'm going to show you that memory biases are actually present. And I'm not saying that rescaling doesn't occur. It's actually a very complex and fundamental issue in the measure of life satisfaction. It's very well described in the chapter by Mark Fabian. But the take-home message is that the use of recall satisfaction data can actually help us understanding the extent of rescaling. And my colleague Kasper Kaiser also worked on this. So people seem to be able to recall how their life evolved to some extent, but we also notice something curious when working with Claudia, which is there are some cases where the evolution of life satisfaction over time is very similar. Look at this left and right figure. In both cases, picking up a stable increase would be a fair approximation of the evolution of life. But some people decided, some people perceived their past as more a steady increase, some people more as an S-shape increase. Now, these 2 shapes are quite similar, but I invite you to notice that the y-axis is actually different. So on the left figure, people are half a point higher on their life satisfaction, which seems to suggest that happy people tend to reconstruct their past differently. But we needed more granular data to dig into this question, and this is what we did in a second study. So to try and understand this relationship between current levels and recalled variations, we wanted to test this research question: do happy and unhappy people recall their past differently? So for this, we used, again, longitudinal reports, so panel data, both on subjective satisfaction levels, so the life satisfaction which was reported each year, and subjective changes in life satisfaction. And by subjective changes, I mean the answer to this question, which appeared in the British Household Panel Survey. The question is the following: would you say that you're more, less, or as satisfied with your life as last year? And it turns out that most people say that more or less they are as satisfied as last year, But again, we observe this asymmetry between the amount of people who say that they are less satisfied and more satisfied. The frequency of feeling more satisfied is actually substantially higher than feeling less satisfied. So in the next steps, what we did is we fixed the longitudinal reports of life satisfaction as a benchmark, and we compared the answer to this question to the deltas which are calculated from life satisfaction over time, so the longitudinal reports. And when we do this exercise, we can produce a two-entry table like the following. So let me guide you through it, since there is a lot of information here. So this 8.1% tells us the following, that 8.1% of respondents said that they were feeling worse than last year, and actually reported a level of life satisfaction which was lower than the year before. So this case is a consistent case. And actually, in 45% of cases, people are consistent between subjective changes and the delta level. There are some people for which we can't say much. These are the people who say that they're about the same as the year before. But the most interesting cases are the people who over or under-report. What do we mean by this? We mean, and here I'm focusing on the green numbers, people over-report when they say that they're feeling better than last year, but we do not observe a higher life satisfaction level than the one reported the year before. And people are under-reporting when they say that they're feeling worse, but again, we do not observe a deterioration in the level of life satisfaction. Once again, there is some asymmetry between the two. Most people tend to over rather than under-report. And it turns out that the probability of over or under-reporting actually depends on how satisfied you are today. Now, this is not a mechanical byproduct of some features of the scale, such as the fact that it's limited, capped at the top or at the bottom. Actually, this type of forces plays against this correlation. So when you see this this graph, on the y-axis, you have the predicted probability of under or over-reporting conditional on the level of life satisfaction. So the first point here at the bottom tells that a person who's very unsatisfied with their life is also very unlikely to over-report their well-being, their life satisfaction. But as life satisfaction increases, the probability to over-report increases, and vice versa for under-reporting. The more satisfied people are, the less they under-report. So overall, happy people seem to overstate the improvement in their life satisfaction, and conversely, unhappy or unsatisfied people. And this over or under-reporting, we wonder if it was actually something useful. It's not obvious. On the one hand, you could think that thinking that things are always going better can be functional to positive traits, but it can also drive you to commit the same mistakes over time. But it actually turns out that if we use over and under-reporting to predict some mental health measures 5 years ahead, the correlation seems pretty clear. Over-reporting is associated with future positive traits, so feeling of autonomy, feeling of happiness, while under-reporting predicts lower scores on general mental health questionnaires. So different memories might explain different behaviors, and again, here the take-home message is there seems to be a very strong connection between the fact of feeling good and the fact of feeling better. Which brings me to the last study that I wanted to present. Okay, if feeling better seems to contain some important information, why don't we just ask people if they feel better? This is a work in progress with Kasper Kaiser. So the motivation comes from the fact that in some situations, for instance, policy evaluation, we want to assess if satisfaction has changed over time. We don't want to know an absolute level or compare different people. We want to track satisfaction over time and knowing if people feel better or worse. Now, what is typically done is that the satisfaction level reported at some time t and the satisfaction level reported before the intervention are compared to calculate this delta level, delta satisfaction. But what if we asked, about changes directly? So what if we just asked people if they feel better? And in theory, there are good reasons for this working well. People tend to have a high sensitivity to small changes. And when we use objective criteria as a benchmark, it has been shown that comparative judgments tend to be more accurate than absolute judgments. Also, in clinical practice, subjective health changes are already used. And a very pragmatic point, if we ask people about how they feel with respect to the past, we do not need panel data. A cross-section would be enough. All this is in theory, but in practice, we don't actually know whether subjective changes or levels perform better. So to answer this question, we collected panel data on Prolific from 500 UK residents. And every 3 months, we asked them the following question. We asked them the standard life satisfaction level, all things considered, how satisfied are you with your life? And then we asked them about their subjective feeling of change, that is to say, compared to 3 months ago, how satisfied with your life are you nowadays? And this was reported on a scale from -3 to +3. Now, in the exercise that we run, we compare these answers, these subjective changes, to what I call delta levels. And by delta levels, I mean the difference between the life satisfaction reported today and the life satisfaction that was reported 3 months before. We asked similar questions about different domains: health, income, housing, partnership, and job satisfaction. And then we collected questions about objective life events. We asked people, did you have an income rise, an income cut? Did you have any health diagnosis? Did you change your house? And so forth and so on, to assess which one of these two measures better fit with the objective life events. In other words, we try to assess the validity of this measure along with measures of statistical reliability. When I'm saying this is a work in progress, I actually mean it. So we're still collecting the data. So far, we have the data from 3 waves. The next data collection is in 2 weeks. And the pre-registration is available at this link. So the first hypothesis that we wanted to test is actually the most important. And it's the one about the validity of either measure. That is to say, we wanted to see if what was going on in people's life correlated, how well it correlated with these 2 measures, so delta levels and subjective changes. So to answer this question, we regressed these 2 measures of delta satisfaction on the life events, which were dummy variables, and we compared the R-squared. So if you already worked with life satisfaction data, you're probably aware that typically we have pretty low R-squared, which is something I find sometimes frustrating. But the good news is that subjective changes actually increase quite substantially the level of R-squared. So these bar charts, and I'm describing the one on the top left, shows the R-squared associated with delta levels and with changes. And what you can see is that when we try to explain the answer to the question compared to 3 months ago, how do you feel today, we are able to explain much more variance in this question. In other words, subjective changes seem to better capture what's going on in people's life. And this is true not only for life satisfaction, but also, and I would say mostly, for income and job satisfaction, which as an economist, I'm quite intrigued about. So this was the main hypothesis that we want to test, but there are other measures of how good these two measures are. So again, delta levels and subjective changes. So the next exercise was to basically reverse the right-hand side and left-hand side of the regression, trying therefore to use the delta satisfaction to predict what was going on in people's life. I'm saying predict, but we were actually post-dicting. So we regressed the occurrence of a life event on these two different measures of delta satisfaction, running therefore different regressions. And when we compare the R-square, you see that, once again, subjective changes tend to be better at post-dicting life events. The third hypothesis that we wanted to look at is how noisy this data is. So we know that people use the scale differently. They have different response styles. Essentially, even people who were in the same situation would give different answers about how satisfied they are. Now, the best idea we could come up with to test this was to ask people to rate the satisfaction of a vignette. So a vignette is a short description of a fictional character, something along the lines of Casey is 50, he has sometimes strong headaches and struggle a bit to walk. And then you ask people, how satisfied is Casey with his health? And then to half of the sample, we presented a different improved situation where Casey now can walk well, let's say. And then we asked to half of the sample to say, okay, how satisfied is Casey now? And to the other half of the sample, we asked, compared to before, how much more satisfied do you think Casey is? And we compared the variance of the answers in these two situations. Now, if there was absolutely no noise, everyone would give the same answer. They would say, yes, now Casey is 1 point more satisfied. But of course, this is not the case. And these histograms show the dispersion of the answers. So let me guide you through this histogram. So on the left-hand side, the first one is about the dispersion to the answer, how satisfied Casey is. So Casey is actually the name of the person in the vignette, how satisfied he is with his health. And then this second histogram shows you the dispersion of the delta level. So the difference between the new satisfaction of the fictional character and the old satisfaction. And you can see that there is some variation, but it's actually a little bit less than the variation that we observe when we ask about perceived changes, about the subjective change. And the reason for this, so here below you can see the score for the variances, 1.1 and 0.958. The reason for this, I think, could be related to the fact that some people misunderstand this question. And the hint for this is that some people say that the person is actually worse off. They give an answer which is -2 or -1, which is clearly not the case in the vignette. So this is about 5% of the respondent. So this is kind of a bad piece of news for subjective changes, but hopefully something that we can fix. The last hypothesis that I want to present to you, the last test, is the one about occasion noise, or random but non-white noise. What do I mean by this? You probably all heard about the famous study where someone finds $0.25 and then is asked about their life satisfaction, and this $0.25 significantly increase the answer on life satisfaction. Now, clearly, we do not want life satisfaction measures to be influenced by these things. We want them to be robust to, the quirks of the day. So to try and test this type of noise, we compare the correlation between life satisfaction levels and changes with the answer to the very first question of the questionnaire, which was, how would you describe today? Was it particularly good, particularly bad, or a typical day? Now, if the information that we're capturing is orthogonal to how bad the day was, the correlation should be 0. Now, of course, there is not a 0 correlation, but the good news for changes is that the correlation is substantially lower than for simple levels. So the type of graph is the same that I showed before. What you see is that there is, so these are the R-squared of the regression, showing that there is a quite strong correlation between the life satisfaction level and the fact that it was a particularly good day or bad day. But this correlation is about a half for changes. And again, this is, I would say, some good news for the robustness of the measure. But overall, the take-home message is there is something which seems to be useful in asking people if they feel better. And we seem to be able to capture a certain amount of information in a clean way. And it could be a way forward to estimate the well-being effect of policies or life events in general. And I think it's time for me to wrap up and move to the conclusions. So by now, hopefully, I convinced you that there are good reasons to study memory, that it can help improving the way we collect, interpret, and analyze subjective well-being data. And to wrap up the 4 studies that I showed you, so in the first study, I showed you that objective variables reported in surveys can suffer from recall biases, and when it's the case of income, these bring to an overestimation of the effect of income on satisfaction. In another example, I showed you that recall life satisfaction can help evaluating issues of rescaling. People seem to be able to recall their past life, and it seems that there is not, the variation that we observed are not entirely due to rescaling. In the third study, I showed that there is an asymmetry, an important one, between how people who feel good or feel bad today reconstruct their past. It seems that people who feel good today tend to feel better than yesterday. And when we explore, I would say, more in detail this question about, do people feel better? Well, it seems that the reporting of feeling better or worse can actually give more reliable information about what's going on in people's life. And the last point is simply, there is a lot more to do and more to learn. So I'm very looking forward to seeing new studies along this research program on how memory can be used to inform us. I would like to acknowledge my wonderful co-authors, Claudia Senik and Kasper Kaiser, as well as the funders of which made this research possible. And thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Alberto. Just I'm going to take over now. I see, yes, a round of virtual applause, very well deserved. Let me start this discussion by first saying that we have more than 30 participants, Alberto. So what I'm going to suggest is that I will start with a couple of questions, and then if some people in the audience want to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand, and then I'll do my best so that everybody has to have a chance to ask a question to Alberto. Okay, so that being said, let me start. Alberto, first of all, thank you very much. What you showed us today, actually, it's a lot of work. So really, you did also a great job in 40 minutes, 45 minutes to manage to share with us all this knowledge you accumulated over the years. And I think the first thing you did was actually to convince me to take notes. I don't know if you can see, but instead of relying on my memory to ask you the questions, like usually I just put a couple of keywords. No, like I really have a full text right now. So I don't believe in my memory. I don't trust it anymore. So I have basically two questions for you. The first one is, let's say, conceptual, and the other one is more practical. But both pertains to the hedonic recall bias, okay? So the first is conceptual, and usually, when we run life satisfaction regression, we don't put subjective stuff on the other side, like we don't like to do this, we don't like to put domain satisfaction. And we don't do this because we are afraid of the common method variance issue, this idea that my reporting function of life satisfaction is probably correlated with the reporting function of something else. Hence, the correlations are completely spurious. There is no real association. So I'm just thinking, the hedonic recall bias, at the end of the day, is it conceptually different from the common method variance issue, or is it just the common method variance issue taking another shape? Question one. Question two, practically. Let's assume that tomorrow I'm talking to some policymakers, and they want me to do a cost effectiveness analysis. And let's assume we believe, in the cost effectiveness framework. One of the key ingredients is that I will need a good estimate of the effect of income on life satisfaction, right? So if we have the hedonic recall bias, how do we get this estimate? Like what are the potential techniques? Of course, you can tell me admin data, but let's assume we don't have admin data, to make it a bit trickier. How do we do this? How do we give a convincing number to these policymakers?
Thank you, Anthony. So two tricky questions. I like them. So I would agree with the so in order, I would agree with the fact that at the end of the day, the hedonic recall bias is very similar to common method variance in the sense that they are both about the same thing, which is endogeneity of the measurement error. So econometrically, this is the same problem. The difference is about the interpretation of the origin of the problem. That the one I suggest is we seem to have a bias which arises either during the encoding or during the retrieval of information. Basically, either when you're learning about your income or when you're recalling about your income. And both both belong to the domain of memory, but it's definitely the same type, the same family of problems that we have with survey data, and that, we try to take as seriously as possible. And as you said, sometimes we do not have administrative data. To be fair, in many cases, we have panel data. So here the work was on a cross-section. Already the use of panel data can greatly help reducing these biases. As for the second question, which is about the use of life satisfaction for cost-benefit analysis, I agree that there is actually a very tricky problem on how accurate we are in the estimation of the effect of the determinants of life satisfaction on life satisfaction, both because we're not measuring very well the determinants, and we're not measuring very well the satisfaction sometimes. But I think that a way around it which could help is on top of having cost-benefit analysis where you project the well-being change on a monetary measure, so you give like a monetary value of it, there is also the, I don't remember the exact name, but it's the comparative appraisal of two policies in terms of their effect on well-being. And I think at the present stage, this is a safer type of exercise that we can run. And not saying that the first one doesn't have a future, but we need to work on it, I think.
I totally agree with you. Thank you very much, Alberto. I don't see any virtual hand in the chat. So if you guys don't raise your hand, no, there is one. Lucas, please go for it.
Hi, thank you very much for the interesting presentation, and it was very informative, I think. And I mean, it has high implications, I guess, because if you're like underestimating, or I mean, we overestimate basically income in terms in relationship to other variables, maybe, I guess. Then, and I was wondering, just like, for example, did you, if you compared, like this refers to the first slides, to the workers who are rather unsatisfied, or the rather satisfied, who are over or underestimating their income, right? Was it? And I was just wondering about did you also make like some heterogeneity analysis? Maybe you did not only refer to in terms of the satisfaction levels, but also in terms of personality or socio-demographics. I mean, that would be interesting to compare. Also, maybe this is not only due to these two categories. And third point was also in terms of to the did you also check whether, for example, check for work satisfaction, not only life satisfaction? Maybe this is not only due to the levels of if they are unsatisfied, or is it maybe their unsatisfaction due to other reasons than their work? I mean, that would be interesting too, I guess.
So yeah, thank you, Lucas, for the two questions. So a caveat before I start my answer, which is this study was published 5 years ago, so no, 6 years ago. So now my memory starts being a little bit flaky about it. But I hope I remember well about the first question, which is there any correlation between, any difference between social demographic groups and how they recall differently their wage? I would say yes, there is a difference. The most striking one was between youngsters and the rest of the population. So the people who are less than 26 years old tend to overestimate by far, to overreport by far how much they earn, while the general tendency is to underreport. There is a general tendency to underreport, which is probably due to some extent to the fact that, you know, people are like, maybe they're going to go and check with the fiscal agency, better to stay on the lowest side. But for youngsters, this is definitely not the case. And I think there are good reasons. I mean, this is actually attuned with in line with the fact that people in their 20s are also the most satisfied with their wage, not because they're earning more, they're actually earning less, but they're typically people who just transitioned from zero income, being a student, to a positive income. So yeah, this is about some interesting heterogeneity in terms of how the effect of wage satisfaction changes with respect to the recall error. There were some analysis in the paper. I'm not sure. I would. Yeah, I think I shouldn't go this way telling you something that I'm not sure about. The paper is published, so I invite you to check there. I'm sorry about that. The second question, which was about which dimension of satisfaction. So to be clear, this first study was not about life satisfaction, it was about wage satisfaction. The question was, how satisfied are you with your wage? The reason I didn't study life satisfaction is that it was not the question in the survey that I studied. This is therefore an open question, the extent of the hedonic recall bias, if any, in the analysis of life satisfaction. But what I did is that I used some placebo variables, such as satisfaction with working hours, satisfaction with, I think, how pleasurable the task is. Basically, I just wanted to check that it's not a general response style. It's not that in general, yes, everything is great and I earn a lot. No, there is not this general correlation. The correlation was in particular with the recall error, between the recall error for wage and wage satisfaction. I hope I answered both questions.
Thank you.
Mark, please. Mark, you're not unmuted.
Yeah, thanks. It was great to see the whole kind of timeline of your work. That was very cool. I have two questions. So, you know, we're doing this research where we talk to people for like 45 minutes about their life satisfaction and how they use the scale and this sort of stuff. One thing that's really struck me about this is that most people have fairly stable ways of making sense of their scale. So they have kind of narratives around it. And they can report changes in that scale as long as life kind of sticks to their plan. And it's when life kind of does something unexpected that we tend to see the structural change in the scale. And it doesn't happen very often, at least in the UK. So I'll give you one example that I'm very fixated on. We have this one woman in the sample who had long COVID. And prior to long COVID, she said she would have been about an 8 out of 10. And 9 out of 10 was like improving her personal best on her marathon time. And after she had long COVID, she was still an 8 out of 10. But that's because she'd managed to go back to work part-time. And her 9 out of 10 was now being able to do any sort of running at all. And she definitely, I asked her directly, like, are you as satisfied with your life now, given you gave the same number? She's like, no, absolutely not. So I'm curious about whether in that study that you have, where you have the shapes that people pick, whether there's any way for you guys to check in the limited data available in the SOAP, whether people have some big change that happened at those points in time or something like that. I think it would be quite a difficult data mining exercise, but maybe AI could help. And then my other question is with respect to the underreporting. So the other finding that disturbs me a lot is that most people don't use the top of their scale. So they say that they would never give a 10 out of 10 and they might give a 9 out of 10, but for like a day. And so I wonder whether, do you have any suspicions about whether under and over reporting is driven at all by this phenomenon of not wanting to use the top of the scale so that you have space to move or something like that? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mark. For the records, I've seen Mark live 40 minutes ago. Now we see each other online. So thank you very much. So as for the first question, I mean, it's actually a suggestion, and I think it's a great one. It's probably not easy, as you were saying, but I think it's very reasonable to assume that the biggest scale changes happen in correspondence with something important, like big sickness, you have kids, you change your job. So definitely I'm gonna look into it. And just to be again clear about these images, I think that what these images say is people can to some extent recall how their life was, and to some extent the scale doesn't shift too much. This doesn't mean that people have perfect memory, far from it, and it doesn't mean the scale doesn't shift. I'm actually quite convinced that it does shift, and it's a problem. As for the second question, which is about top coding, essentially, you know, you tell me 7, or maybe you tell me 6 out of 7, then the year after you feel that you're better, but you don't want to say 7 out of 7 because, you know, it's 7 out of 7. So you rather prefer to stay kind of having a little bit of margin down or up. And the reason that we're not really worried about it, although, I mean, in theory, it definitely makes sense, but in a graph that I don't have on my slides, you can see that empirically, the probability, the amount of underreporting and overreporting, it's quite stable along the scale. Well, what I would expect, if this is really the explanation, is that there is really a spike at 7, and then there is quite high at 6. But, you know, if you're saying 3, 4, 5, you're quite, you should be far enough from the extrema of the scale to not follow the pattern. But the pattern seems to be quite consistent. But again, this is definitely something that plays a role, and in particular at the extreme of the scale. If you tell me 7, and if you tell me that you're better off, well, you can just say 7. So definitely by construction, there is that this would be recorded as a form of over-reporting, but it's actually not over-reporting. I hope this answers your questions.
Okay, I see that Mark is nodding. Oh, Sophia, please, for the last question.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much. I'll try to be really quick. Yeah, so a couple of my lab mates are exploring vignettes as a potential solution to try to overcome all these problems with the scale. I'm just very general question. What do you think about the vignette method as a potential solution to solving the scale response problem or the reporting function problem?
Thank you for asking this question. My answer would be, I think they can be very helpful. I don't think they are the solution, sadly, because you need a set of additional assumptions to analyze vignettes, which are not obvious. They might hold, but they're very hard to test themselves, and it kind of shifts a little bit the problem. However, I think they're very helpful to understand response styles, to understand differences between people, and even to in the way that we used it, to understand how noisy answers are, because the people here had exactly the same information, but they still gave different ratings to this person. So there is some information in this variance, and I think it's definitely a useful tool.
And your timing is perfect, Alberto. I see like the time. Yes, we are perfectly on time. So again, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you to the participants also for your very interesting question. And Jill, well, the floor is yours for the conclusion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alberto. That was fantastic. Thank you to everyone who participated. If you don't remember, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar as well as the presenter materials in a follow-up email reminder to everyone to please consider submitting your abstracts for upcoming conferences and also joining us as a member if you aren't already. So thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Jill.